Hello? Just talk. Nope, it's gone off. It's come back on. Things are happening down here. Better put my phone back on in case they want to call.
Jeffrey, you're just meant to speak.
Hello?
There's nobody there.
No, speak up, darling. It's no point whispering.
You're just meant to talk. There's nobody there.
There's nobody there.
Okay. There's plenty of people there, but they're all out.
Good evening. It's quite difficult speaking, being told there are people there and just looking at a screen. But these are indeed strange times. So I thought that I'd talk a little to begin with about how I got into writing, because it wasn't what I would call a normal route. I think most writers I've met in my life knew from a young age that that was what they wanted to do, and they had always felt that was the life that they were training for and getting ready for. Not me. When I left Oxford, I wanted to be a politician, and indeed the first serious election, I thought, was for the Greater London Council, and I stood for the seat of Romford in Essex and began my political career serving on the Greater London Council. And then at the age of 29, I entered the House of Commons and assumed that I would have a full political career, that I had 30 or 40 years ahead of me to have a political career, but everything went wrong. I made a foolish investment in a company called Aquablast and lost everything, and even more stupid, invested money I didn't really have. So at one point I was down £400,000, and we're talking about 1965, 1966. So this was not clever. But I thought the story of how I'd lost it was in itself interesting, and if I could write a novel about 4 young men who had lost $1 million between them and decide to steal it back, not a penny more, not a penny less, maybe someone would enjoy it. So I sat down and wrote the book, and indeed after it was finished, I was lucky enough to get Deborah Owen to be my agent because she believed in the book, and the first 16 publishers turned it down. In fact, there was virtually no one left. And then Jonathan Cape came along in the form of Tom Mashler, and he said he would buy it for £3,000, which didn't make a very big dent in 400,000. And indeed, he published it very well indeed in hardback, and we just about sold the 3,000 copies in a year. It then went into paperback with Coronet, who published 25,000, and they did get rid of those in a year. But I was still in tremendous debt and debating whether this was a career I should consider, because I was living off my wife. She was a don at Cambridge by then and earning a teacher's salary, while her husband was trying to make a career writing. Second book did a little bit better. It sold, shall we tell the president, sold 8,000 in hardback and about 60 to 70,000 in softback. It cheered me up, but the debts weren't exactly plummeting. And then I went away and wrote Cain and Abel, and that unquestionably changed my life, literally overnight. In fact, the lovely room I'm sitting in now in the old vicarage, part of the folly of the main house, came when the first check came for Cain and Abel. And I confess that I didn't realize that my whole life was going to change overnight. I had no reason to believe after 3,000, 8,000 and 60,000 in paperback that Cain and Abel would sell 1 million in the first week. That came as a shock, and indeed has changed my whole life. And so then I knew I was going to go on writing. I knew that was what I was going to do, but I had quickly learned that I wasn't a writer. I was a storyteller. I liked telling a story, whether it was short or whether it was long. And in between these long novels, I wrote several short stories, and have now written 24 novels and 92 short stories. And I've enjoyed every moment. And indeed, here I am at the age of 80 in lockdown. And during lockdown, I have been writing for 782 hours. There's never been a better opportunity to get on with the job when you're actually locked down. And I've enjoyed every moment of it. The first of the Clifton Chronicles came out a year ago, and when I came down here, I was just putting the finishing touches to the second book. And the second book, Hidden in Plain Sight, will be out in October. But while I've been here, I've written the third book. So it's been a really productive time. And the interesting thing from a writer's point of view, from those of you who would consider writing, I found that I relaxed more when writing this book. Do you know, when I used to go away to Mallorca, I have a lovely home in Mallorca where I write, I always knew it was for 40 days. And I always knew I was coming back, whether it was to be involved in an auction or going to the theatre or something I was involved in that had to be there. With this, I knew I wasn't coming back. I couldn't move until the Prime Minister said I could. So actually I took it a lot more slowly and a lot more carefully. And I think the book benefits from that. And even at my old age, I've learnt from that and found it a great advantage. And so I'm on book 3 and working on it now. And book 2, as I say, is coming out in October. And so I've had a career of writing and mixed it with a love and interest in politics. And of course, my charity work mainly as an auctioneer. That has been tremendous fun. And people say, do you still enjoy writing, Geoffrey? Why don't you just retire? You've got everything. No, I like work. I'll go on working. Though I confess that if I ever became bored or couldn't think where I was going to go on the next page, yep, I'd call it a day. But at the moment, the ideas are sprouting night and day. I can't stop them. So I'm very, very lucky, because the truth is, like being an opera singer, like being a ballerina, like being a businessman, the gift is what makes the difference. And I have been very lucky and will be eternally thankful for that. And I thank you, because I've supported the small book clubs around the country the whole of my writing life. And I know this period of time has been particularly tricky for you. And so I'm only too delighted to thank you for all you're doing, and to hope we'll come out of this terrible trouble and that you will flourish again. Because you can say what you like about audio, you can say what you like about Kindle, but in the end, I like to have and to hold a book. Thank you. Speak up.
So now you've got some questions in front of
Ah, I
you
just
can
answer the questions.
read them out. And
I've got some questions. My wife is telling me that I read out the questions because you kindly have sent them in, and I try and answer them. Well, where did your writing career start? As I said, it started by mistake. I had never intended to have a writing career, but it started in actual fact at Oxford, because my old principal, Sir Noel Hall, when I had my financial downfall, gave me a room in Brasenose College, pen, paper, rubbers and pencils, and said, okay, get on with it. And thanks to his kindness and understanding, I was able to write the first book in relative peace. Your second question is to describe a synopsis in 3 sentences of Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel is the story of 2 men born on the same day. One with everything, one with nothing. They only meet once in their life, but that meeting changes their whole life. That's the story of Cain and Abel. Someone has asked, do I prefer writing a screenplay or a novel? Well, or short stories, indeed short stories. It's good to have a change. If you've just done, let's say, for example, Cain and Abel is approximately 300,000 words. If you've just done something that big, it's quite fun to turn to a dozen short stories. And I get lovely short stories from all over the world. People tell me the most amazing vignettes or examples of something that's happened to them. And then along comes an idea for a play. So I've never said, oh, well, I'll write 6 novels in a row and then I'll do 3 plays and then I'll do it. Whatever the mood has taken me at that time. The one exception to that was at the age of 70, 10 years ago. I thought, I've got to drive myself. I can't just afford to slack off. And I decided to write the Clifton Chronicles. I started off thinking it would be 3 volumes. Then I thought it would be 5, and it ended up 7. And I rarely enjoyed writing anything so much in my life. And of course it was a real challenge to take Harry Clifton and Emma Clifton and Giles all the way through 70 years of their lives. One born in the back streets of Bristol, his friend at Bristol Grammar School, the son of a distinguished lord, and then he falls in love with the lord's daughter. So that was the premise, and I thought I could take that on, I thought 3 books. And then it just got more and more exciting and ended up with 7 books. What's my writing day like? My wife's sending me a message, so I'll tell you what the message is, and then come in on, what did your inspiration come, where did the inspiration come from for Cain and Abel? Before we go on to a writing day, 2 gentlemen, a man called Kwiatkowski, who founded a helicopter company, was born in the back streets of Warsaw, and his close friend was the Rothschild, the politician Rothschild. And they couldn't have been more different. But unlike my 2 main characters, they were close friends. And they both agreed to see me. I spent a week with both. And that was fascinating because I love my politics. So that side was interesting. And Kwiatkowski was one of those one-off human beings that don't come along very often. And they gave me story after story, and then I tried to meld it in. But as I said, they liked each other, my 2 more protagonists. A writing day. When I go to Mallorca, I rise at 5:30, and I do 4 2-hours. So I do 6 to 8 and take a 2-hour break, 10 to 12 and do a 2-hour break, 2 to 4 and do a 2-hour break, and the final session in the evening is 6 to 8, and then I have a light supper and go to bed around 9:30, 10, up again at 5:30. And the first draft, as I said earlier when I was doing my description, about 42 days, whereas in truth, the latest book that I've just finished took 52 days. So I was taking it more quietly and not in any way rushing, because there was no reason to rush. The answer to your question, do I still write in Mallorca, or is that my main writing place? Mary and I were pretty well on our way to Mallorca and had already booked to go. We already had the plane tickets. But Mary felt strongly that we might get caught there. And she said, I'd like to go down to Cambridge. Well, I have a beautiful, as you can see, a beautiful office here. So there's nothing stopping me writing in Cambridge. That's absolutely fine. So instead of going to Mallorca this time, I came down to our home in Cambridge with no regrets. To begin with, we had 70 or 80 days of the most glorious weather. So I was able to do 3 miles a day. And so far, I've done just under 400 miles of walking. So that was perfect. We've had a few days rain recently, but I can't complain because it has been wonderful. So this book will have been written in Cambridge. My wife is sending me another message. And of course, Mary points out that the old vicarage Grantchester, and Grantchester in particular, was on the television series. So a lot of people got to know about the village. Who is Harry Clifton? Well, Harry is a bit me, and Emma, who he marries, is a bit Mary. And I guess I say to people, if you're going to write a book, write about what you know about. Then the characters will be real and the story will feel real. A lady said to me the other day, well, I want to write a book, Geoffrey, which is not uncommon. People are always saying that to me. And I said, well, what do you do? Oh, she said, that's the problem, she said. I work in a hairdresser. And I said, don't be silly. There'll be more stories in a hairdresser than there will be anywhere else. They'll be coming out all the time. Just keep your ears open and make your novel in a hairdresser. Everyone will know it's accurate. So you've got to, I love politics, I love art, I love sport, and I suppose all those get into the books. So I always say to people, write about what you know about. You'll feel better than that. Tell us about William Warwick. Sorry, I'm being interrupted again.
There's also questions down the left.
I can't hear you.
There's also questions down the left-hand side.
Oh, thank you very much. There are questions down the left-hand side. Mary is taking care of me, as she always does. Let me do these last 2 or 3 on your sheet. William Warwick. Well, so many people wrote to me when the Clifton Chronicles was published, saying they liked Harry Clifton, and he was a novelist, and his hero was William Warwick, a detective in the Metropolitan Police. And they kept writing and saying, we'd like to know about William Warwick, this detective in the Metropolitan Police. And I thought that's a good idea. And we set him off when he's at school, wanting to be a detective, when his father, Sir Julian Warwick, wants him to read law at Oxford and then join him in Chambers. But he doesn't want to do that. He wants to be a detective. So he defies his father. And in book 1, and the books, by the way, aren't in sequence in that sense. You can pick up any one of them and it's a story. But in book 1, William is a detective constable. And in book 2, he's a sergeant. And the one I've just finished, I'm working on at the moment, just above me, in my room above me, he's an inspector. In the first one, he's put into the art squad to deal with a missing Rembrandt. In the second one, he's put into the drug squad and has to chase Mr. Big, who's running a drugs empire south of the river. And in the third book, he's dealing with police corruption. So those are the first three, and I know the fourth book is murder. And I've been very lucky because I've had the support of a Detective Superintendent John Sutherland, a very distinguished Metropolitan policeman who retired a couple of years ago and has been advising me so I can't make silly mistakes. But he also comes up with the most amazing stories in his career, which of course one can slip into the book. Those of you who have read the first book will remember who've read Nothing Ventured will remember the story of a young constable being told by the desk sergeant to rush to Boots and get this formula, get this dealt with at Boots, immediately get this prescription dealt with. It's needed by someone in the cell. So off he rushes, he hands it over to the girl behind the counter. She reads it and gives him a packet of condoms. He then reads what the desk sergeant said, which was, at last I've got a girlfriend and I think tonight's the night. What do I do next? And obviously this had happened to John when he was a young constable. And so a storyteller should always pick up vignettes and just drop them in to the main story. And that's a classic example. So the research mainly is human beings, looking at your questions. The research, of course, I read a lot of books. Of course, I am fascinated by great men and women telling me things. But it is, in the end, the experts I like to talk to. Well, I've told you about my new book. I'm writing a series, though each one is individual, so it doesn't matter when you pick it up. I'm writing a series on William Warwick. He's now reached Inspector, but you can start with him on the beat in Lambeth and start at the beginning, or just join in whenever you like. What's the best thing about being an author? Now, there's a good question. Down comes this wicked COVID-19 and coronavirus, and I can go home and get on with my job. What a privilege. How lucky I've been. I felt for those people who had to be in a company or couldn't do their job, all those people in entertainment, all those people who are working in restaurants or hotels. They can't do that. So I got on with my job. So in that was very lucky indeed. What are your recommendations for other books? Well, the book I've most enjoyed in the last year is A Gentleman in Moscow. I thought that was quite outstanding. I couldn't put it down. That really is my book of the year. But I always say to people that Stefan Zweig is my heroic author. He combines that amazing ability to be a great writer and a great storyteller, and that is very, very rare. And I think Beware of Pity truly is a masterpiece. I'm currently reading, as you're sitting there, and when I leave you, I shall return to, I'm currently reading Washington Square by Henry James, which I haven't read since I was a child. I can remember the ending, which is annoying because I'm enjoying it so much. I'm sorry that I know what happens in the end. But then I've always said about Shakespeare, imagine seeing Romeo and Juliet without knowing the ending. Wow! You would discover that Shakespeare was not only the greatest writer this nation's ever produced, but the greatest storyteller this nation has ever produced. So I'm now going to go to the questions on the screen. Is that what I do next, Mary? Mary's helping me through, thank heavens. It says here, very interestingly, my wife has written very interestingly because she's a great academic. It sounds as though you're led by your characters rather than planning the book out. And actually, she's right. I am led by my characters.
That's a question.
You're quite right.
It's a question that's come in. I'm feeding them.
It's a question. Oh, it's not you. It's someone else. Oh, I'm so sorry. Someone has asked. It sounds as if you're led by your characters. Yes, I am. I am. And I was they did a big survey on my books 5 years ago. And it was fascinating to discover. They asked what was the thing they most thought about the books. And I thought they'd say storyteller. And Storyteller was second. It was the characters people said they loved, which was a bit of a shock for me. And storytelling, as I say, was second. So the characters were top and the storyteller was second. So yes, I think when you get writing about William Warwick and his wife Beth and the villain Miles Faulkner, sometimes they take you off in a direction you hadn't even thought of. And I've had a letter today, even today I had a letter saying, well, I do like your villains. I don't want to meet any of them, but I do like them. So villains, my wife always says villains are easier to write and are much more fun. And I think there's a bit of truth in that as well. So what's the next question? Do I look on the screen? Oh, hello, Jeffrey. How are you? I'm very well. Sorry. So I'll go back to the questions that have been written here, which will help me along. Any tips for would-be writers? Well, I'm very cruel about that, I must confess. Over the years, people have come to me and said, you know, Jeffrey, I could write a great novel if only I had the time. I've got my job, I've got my family, I've got my commitments. I'll never be able to do it, they say. Well, lockdown, for a lot of people, has given them the opportunity to write the novel. So I hope those people won't come up to me and say, I didn't have the opportunity, because they certainly have this time. And actually, I think, and I may be wrong, but I said to a distinguished agent the other day, Caroline Michel, a very distinguished agent, I said to her that I thought this period of coronavirus will produce some very amazing novels, and many of them will be first novels, because people will suddenly have had 12, 15 weeks and they've decided to write that novel they were always going to write. And I suspect, not this year, too soon, but I suspect next year and the year after, we will see some very remarkable novels. Excuse me. I must say, I'd much rather see you out there. Just chattering to the screen is not fun. I always like to see the people who are asking these questions and try and gauge why they're asking. I remember once I was in Jaipur, and a young journalist came up and said, I want you to tell me the secret of where you get your stories. And I said, well, to be honest, that's what I do. I'm very lucky. No, no, she said, I'm not going to tell anyone. If you tell me where you get them, I won't tell anyone. I said, well, I get up in the morning, I sit down, and they just come. I'm very, no, I'm not going to tell anyone. Oh, all right, I said, all right. I have this lovely home in Cambridge, and at the end of the garden, there's the River Cam. And I go down there at 5:30 in the morning, and there's a particularly good spot under one tree where I dig. And then I look into the hole, and gosh, there are the stories. She ran away and slammed the door, very cross with me. Another question has just come in, which I'll read out to you. What was your most memorable book tour? I'd have to say India. In the recent tour to Jaipur for the book festival, 7,500 people turned out to hear me speak. One of the most thrilling moments of my life, and one of the most frightening. They love reading in that country. They love to meet the authors and talk to them. So wherever I went, there were large crowds. So I think I'd have to put India top. But America's always fun, because there's always so much going on in America. So you don't have to just talk about your books. At the moment, if I was on tour, of course, I could talk about President Trump. I could talk about Joe Biden. I could talk about the problems of coronavirus and how they're approaching it. And indeed, what's happening in the United States with Black Lives Matter. So there's so much going on when you're in America, because they're such a big and thriving country, that a tour there is always fun, because you never know in your next show what they're going to want to talk to you about. Though many years ago, when I was I'd written Cain and Abel, and I went to do Good Morning America, and I sat opposite the man, and I could see that the book was pristine. He clearly hadn't read a word, and he was just about to interview me, and I could see he was reading the back, and then he was reading my press release. He was desperately trying to get some notes. So he sat there and he said, "I see you came over on the Concorde, Geoffrey." And I said, "Yes, I did, David." It was David Hartman. I said, "Yes, I did, David. This is the most amazing plane that's ever been built by man. It flies twice the height of a normal plane. It flies twice the speed of a normal plane. You can have breakfast in London, and when you land in New York, you can have breakfast again. What an amazing achievement for British engineering." And Dave Hartman said, "It's been lovely having you on the show." My publishers were not pleased, because they'd instructed me to say the words Cain and Abel as often as I could in 2.5 minutes, and I hadn't mentioned it once. And then I got a bit of luck in Washington at the end of that particular tour. I went along to do an interview on the main Washington news program, and they said, "Look, we're very sorry, Geoffrey, we can only give you 2 minutes, because we've got Henry Kissinger coming on from Moscow to discuss the treaty being signed, and he's coming on. We've got the exact minute, so you'll get 2 minutes at the beginning, and then we'll take you off. That's it." Well, I was very delighted, frankly, to have 2 minutes. And they sat down and they said, "Well, Geoffrey, tell us about Cain and Abel." Well, I'd learnt by then that you've got to mention the title as often as possible. I'd learnt by then that 2 minutes isn't a very long time, and they throw you off pretty quickly. So Cain and Abel is a story of two men, both born on the same day, one with nothing, one with everything. They only meet once in their life, and it changes their whole lives. And I thought, well, that's it. They're about to throw me off. And he said, "Yes. Now, where did you get the inspiration for this program, for this book?" And I thought, it's weird. I'm due off any moment. I mean, what am I doing? Oh, well, I said, well, the inspiration came from two remarkable men in the United States of America, who I had the privilege of living with for a short period, and seeing the contrast with these two men. And I thought, we must be off now. Mr. Kissinger must be on. And then he said, "And when you're writing something this long, does this add an extra..." And this went on and on and on. And I learnt afterwards that they couldn't get the link to Moscow. They got me stuck on the screen, and they could not get through to Moscow. So I had 30 minutes on the main program in Washington, and the book went straight to #1. So I'm very grateful for that piece of luck. Oh, another question is coming through. Where's your favorite place to write? Truth is, of course you have favorite places. The only really important thing for me is peace and quiet. I cannot bear any form of noise when I'm writing. If I can't get it, it has to be my fault, not someone else's. So it's lovely here in Cambridge, and of course it's magnificent. I wish I could show you. It's magnificent in Mallorca, Writer's Block. Absolutely such fun. So either of those two are wonderful. But the truth is that most writers just get on with it, wherever they are. So I've been very lucky in that. But I think it used to be Writer's Block that was #1, with Cambridge #2. I think they're now first equal, and I really have enjoyed this immense challenge in the last 16 weeks of not being allowed out, being locked down, and, as I say, writing for 600 or 700 hours. Here's another question coming. They're flooding in. 2 questions. Do you use a typewriter? That's the first one. Wouldn't have a clue. Do you know, you wouldn't be seeing me tonight if it wasn't for my wife. She was down here this afternoon working out how this all worked, how we would get through to you, because I couldn't even turn you on. I hand write every word with a pen initially for the first draft, and then it's typed up for me, and I use a pencil on triple spacing. I use a pencil on every draft after that. And the normal book would be about 14 or 15 drafts. It's a long process, about 1,000 hours a book. I wish there was a shortcut, but there isn't a shortcut. You need the inspiration, you need the story, but you also have to be willing to work very hard indeed. So I've never used the typewriter, never used any form of machinery. If you could see this room, you would see that Mary has all the latest gadgets, and I don't even know how to turn them off or on. So I'm useless. And here's another question just come in. Do you miss the characters when you finish a book? That's a very good question. I think the Clifton Chronicles, I think Harry and Emma and Giles and the wicked Lady Virginia lived with me and still do, and still do. And now it's happening with William Warwick. He's taking over my life. I can see where he's going. I can see that he wants to go from being on the beat in Lambeth, and at the end of his career, if I live long enough, at the end of his career, he'll be Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. But I have to take him through every stage on the way. And I'm becoming very attached to him. I feel I'm carrying out his career with him. And because I've got two very remarkable police officers, John Sutherland, who I've already mentioned, and Detective Sergeant Michelle Roycroft. Ho! She's a fierce woman. She once told me about a time when she dived in the top of a car onto a 6-foot man who was escaping. Well, I wouldn't have done that in my youth, and there she was doing it and got beaten up doing it. And so I have the contrast of someone who reached the very highest ranks of chief superintendent to someone who worked on the ground in the drug squad, in the murder squad, and was able to bring that grittiness to me and tell me what her life was like. And perhaps more interesting, what it's like for a woman to have gone through a career in the Metropolitan Police. So those two have brought to the William Warwick series, to Nothing Ventured, and the latest coming out in October, Hidden in Plain Sight, have brought not only authenticity, but I think a grittiness and a realness that I hope will come over in the books. And another question, they're flooding in. I have to read them out. Have I ever experienced writer's block? I wish Mary could show you, perhaps she can on the phone, writer's block in Mallorca, because then you'd see we'd named our home in Mallorca. No is the answer. I have to say I've never had writer's block as such. I've had stops. In a book I wrote called As the Crow Flies, my hero, Charlie Trumper, had to get himself out of a problem, and he realized he had to go to Australia and see a matron in a care home because she knew the answer. And I had him go to Australia. I had him arrive at the care home, and when he arrived at the care home, I wrote it that morning, she died. She died a couple of days before he arrived. And so his one chance of saving everything were done. Now, an author should do that occasionally. They should put themselves in such a corner they can't get out. And I didn't have writer's block over that problem. I had 3 days of wondering how to get him out of the problem. And on the 3rd day it came. I was walking around the outside of a large golf course, and it suddenly came. And when it comes, by the way, you're saying this idea and that idea, no, that doesn't work, the reader won't believe that, that's not authentic, and it doesn't ring true. And then suddenly The Scottish matron who's taken over says, I found a letter addressed to so-and-so, and he knows in that letter is the answer to his question. And she's Scottish, and she says, I wonder, as you're going back to England, if you could post it when you get back to England, and we'll save the postage stamp from Australia. And there I had it. He was on the plane, he could open the letter, and the answer was there. So never writer's block in that sense, but 2 or 3 times in my writing life, I've put myself into as difficult a corner as possible. And then if you don't know the way out, how can the reader know the way out? And the great Corley Smith, one of the great American editors, once said to me, if there's a chance to make it more difficult, Geoffrey, make it more difficult, and the reader will wonder how you're going to get out of it. I think that's the answer to that. And here comes another one. Mary's writing them out furiously. Which book or books of yours would you most like to see made into a film? I think Paths of Glory. I think the story of Mallory attempting to conquer Everest, and did he conquer Everest in 1924? He was unquestionably the greatest climber of his day, but did he reach the top in 1924? I loved the concept of him being in love with 2 women, one Chalamunga, goddess mother of the earth, and 2, his beautiful wife Ruth. And I've always thought it would make a type of Chariots of Fire film. So yes, I would love to see that. We get offers every day. The problem is with Hollywood is they make the offers and they either disappear or they send a check and never make it. I'd love to see Cain and Abel made again, and I'd love to see Prisoner of Birth made into a film. I think that's a natural for a film. But I'm afraid you just have to sit and wait for the phone to go, and you have to be in favour. No doubt my grandchildren will see all of them made, and I hope they enjoy them. Here's another one coming. Can you tell us a little about the photos on the wall behind you? Well, it's mainly my wife's family. I can see her, my father-in-law and his grandparents and his parents. And I think there's a picture of Mary and me there somewhere. I can't quite spot it. Mary's a great family person, and we've been very lucky because in this coronavirus, well, lucky at one level and not so lucky at another. We had a granddaughter. We had a granddaughter called Sophia in the 2nd week of coronavirus. So Mary, when the Prime Minister said you can all travel a little, she went up to London to see the granddaughter while I remained here. And then the 2nd time we were allowed to go, Mary and I went up together for 3 days and saw our new granddaughter, Sophia, which was very thrilling indeed. So I now have 2 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. So I'm very, very lucky. Oh, Mary's writing something. I think she wrote the answer to the last one. Here we go. Ah, yes, I must make it clear. I wish I could move you around, but I can't. This is Mary's office. She works there. Oh, look, there's a picture of her when she was an undergraduate at Oxford. Right there. That's her. Whoops, let me point up at it. There it is. And this is her office. This is where she works. I'm above. I've got the floor above. She's got the floor below. And she converted this rubbish dump, because that's what it was, into 2 lovely offices about the same size. Mine is a lot more ancient up there. It's a lot more spy cartoons and pictures of the days when I was a runner. Hers is much more modern with sophisticated machinery. And if you look carefully at the titles of the books, which you probably can't see, but I was watching her on television the other day, and almost every book, there's the chemistry of the elements, there's modern inorganic chemistry, physical chemistry. So you get a clue that this is not my office, but my wife's, who of course is chairman of the Science Museum, and having had her own problems during coronavirus, because she closed down the museum very early on brought the great liner to a halt in the middle of the ocean, and now she's being instructed to open it again. And I think she is finding that a tremendous challenge to open such a great museum and get it on the move again. And I think she's hoping that it'll be open to the public in the middle of August. And that's what she's working on all the time. Do I miss politics? No. I mean, gosh, it must be tricky to be Prime Minister at the moment. Did I have a wonderful time working for Margaret Thatcher and John Major? Yes, I did. Was it a privilege? Yes, it was. Would I do it again? Yes, I would. But I was thinking the other day, it's a no-win situation for any Prime Minister, whatever colour, Labour, Conservative, Liberal. You can only get it wrong, and people are so critical nowadays. I once remember Henry Kissinger saying, when he thought about his career, he said, I hope I got it right 51% of the time. And I think that's the problem with politics. You're blooming lucky if you get it right 51% of the time, but there are enough people who will just continually criticize you for that other 49% or what they think you're doing wrong. So I don't miss it in that sense. And of course, I remain a member of the House of Lords, so I'm in touch, and I have many friends who are still in the centre, so I'm in touch, and they brief me and keep me well informed. So if you're asking if I miss the centre of the stage, no, I do not. I'm very happy and very privileged to be allowed to do my writing. Another question coming. I can see it shooting across. Give me a moment. Mary's writing them out. What's Mary's favourite book? Because I must tell you before I answer that question, we once went down to a university together, of which she is now the Vice-Chancellor. The Chancellor. She's scowling at me because I said she was the Vice-Chancellor when she's the Chancellor. And we sat down, and the Vice-Chancellor asked us if we'd speak together, which we'd never done. We'd never done a programme together, so we made a speech together. And afterwards there were 14 questions, 12 for Mary and 2 for me. So there wasn't any doubt what they thought, and fairly soon after they made her Chancellor of the University of Buckingham. So Mary's asking, you're asking, what is Mary's favourite book? Well, if she can come onto the screen for half a minute, she'll tell you herself. She said she doesn't want to, but I've always known, because she goes on and on about it. So her favourite book is Middlemarch. She's said that for George Eliot's great masterpiece, has long been her favourite book. And she's a huge admirer of Marcel Proust. And I think she's one of those people who genuinely has read them line for line. Not me. Genuinely has read them line for line. But she's also, there's a little bit of normal in her, not a lot, because she loves Dickens as well. And if you talk to her about Dickens, she knows all the characters, sometimes knows the lines. She has a great love of Dickens. But I will tell you a little secret. But this, by the way, that I'm about to say applies to all authors. It's not just me. It would apply to all authors. There is no reason why a wife, a son, a daughter should be a natural fan of your books. And as you can imagine, as she loves George Eliot and Marcel Proust, I wouldn't be a natural for her if we weren't married. I've got one son who can't wait to read the next book, and I've got one son who very kindly reads the next book. But I suspect that's true of any author, that we have our favourites, we have the ones we love, and historically Mary and I are in common with Dickens. We both love Dickens. But you know, when it comes to the greatest storyteller of all, it's still William Shakespeare. He is still the greatest storyteller of all. Mary and myself, and we're very sad if this isn't allowed to go on, Mary and myself go down to Stratford upon Avon once a year on a Friday, And we go to the Friday evening performance of one of the plays, and then we do on the Saturday a matinee and then an evening performance. So we do 3 plays at the Royal Shakespeare Company in 2 days, once a year. And we do the same thing in London in the sense that we go to the Barbican and see a Shakespeare plays there as well, and of course at the National Theatre. But our theatres are having such trouble at the moment, it's sad. And what's really sad about it is Britain has in its history led many, many things of which we can be immensely proud. And the one thing we unquestionably are still better at than anyone in the world is the theatre. And it's going to have a very long battle to get back to normal. And I pray that it will as quickly as possible, because when things were normal before this terrible bug came along, I went to the theatre at least once a week and regularly twice. There was very little in London that I hadn't been to, and Mary's a great lover of the opera, and I'm a great lover of the ballet. In fact, we saw the most wonderful production of Swan Lake just before we came down, and Tom Stoppard's latest play we saw, and that sadly had to close. And I just wonder how long it's going to take for, say, the London Palladium to open for a Christmas pantomime. I fear it won't be this year. I pray it will be, but I fear it won't be this year. Another question coming. I can see it coming. Thank you. Oh, we must be coming to the end, because I'm being told we're coming to the end. But wow, it's been good of you to have me. I really appreciate it, because it gives me a chance to thank all those people in independent bookshops who've made my career. If you don't have the independent bookshops behind you, you won't succeed. And I'm praying when we get out of this coronavirus, you'll come flying back, because every time we lose an independent bookshop, it's a real death. I wish you every success and happiness. Thank you.